So today we were talking about business meetings, right? The everyday business meetings and how those connect into the work of facilitation as workshop facilitators and as facilitators of better connection and gatherings in general. In the description for the session, I made a number of promises, and as a quick reminder, here's what they are. By the time you get out, you will have some insights into how to design better workshop takeaways by understanding, when people leave that workshop, where are they going and where are they supposed to be applying whatever it is that you did there? Um, Ideally, you'll be able to elevate your own business operations. I'm not making any judgment. I'm sure you're doing wonderfully, but perhaps there's something in the way that you run your internal meetings or your contracting meetings that could be improved by this knowledge. And most importantly, let's expand our impact and take the world of facilitation out of that one-off special, I go off into the workshop room and I have this wonderful experience, and make it part of how we live our lives every day. So let's become comprehensive meeting consultants and make the world a better place for folks to come together in. And we'll cover that content in three parts. And I want to start anchoring with the problem to solve, and the problem that we were trying to solve when we came up with this taxonomy in the first place. So the taxonomy that we're going to be sharing today was originated, 2015 or something. And we've been through a number of iterations since then. So the problem that we started with, and that I think all of us should be solving, is this. Too much wasted time in unproductive meetings, which continually comes up if you're working in the corporate world as part of what we see on the engagement surveys, on the complaints in the boardrooms and in the locker rooms and in all the places. And it's a big deal. So let's see. And it's not new, right? We're not the first people to complain about this. In fact, in the Middle Ages, in the craft guilds, they decided they needed to have a rule that the elders in charge could issue on the spot fines to people who were speaking out of turn or causing problems or getting rebellious in an indecent way, which I'm sure I would have been fined more than once had I been in those meetings. And of course, the fines didn't work all that well. So one town in the Middle Ages took it even farther, and put a rule on their books that anybody who's talking about things that are off topic could be condemned to death. Um, so we have no records that this rule was ever invoked, but you can see that people really care about how their time is used in meetings. And it's not just our forebears who cared a lot, our current team members care too. So Dr. Allen, who is one of the most prolific meeting scientists, recently did a study on how people are impacted when others are late to the meeting. And he was shocked to find out that modern day people envision, honest to goodness, violence against those folks who show up 10 minutes late because they got distracted by LinkedIn, right? So when the excuse isn't great and you're running late, boy, people are not happy with it, and that anger persists for days, potentially, after that meeting. So it's a well-recognized problem, it's an ancient problem, and it's a problem we've got some passion about. It's also a problem that has significant impact on businesses. Now, I'll send these slides afterwards, so we're not going to read them all, but for those of you who like to talk stats and research with your business clients, when companies have ineffective meetings, it impacts their revenue. So salespeople who can't meet well can't land deals. It impacts productivity. Not only does it slow down the work inside the workday, but it forces people to work overtime. That increases expenses and reduces quality. It impacts retention when meetings with your direct supervisor feel like a waste of your time, like they're not involving your voice, that they're not inclusive. You are more likely to disengage and quit. Frequent meetings, that overload leads to burnout, even when we like them, right? So even when you're in a culture, some of these cultures that focus on, like, we're going to perform Netflix, Google, SpaceX, Those people are often driven to perform well and meet all day and be on focus, and they expected tenure in many of those teams is 3 years. So it's not necessarily satisfaction. Too much will burn you out. When our meetings are poorly organized, the innovation flow slows down. So if you're not connecting across departments and change, you can't get new ideas, new products to market. In the impact space, one of the examples I find most shocking and compelling is they say for the Sustainable Development Goals globally, it will take $200 trillion to solve them, and there's $100 trillion of impact capital waiting to be invested. The money's there, the solutions are known, but the chain is broken because the conversations are broken. And then finally, if you can't meet well, you can't make effective decisions quickly. So the business impact is a big deal. And yet we have ineffective meetings that are having a terrible potential impact on our business. And we're doing more and more of them all the time. So in the last 5 years, we've seen the number of meetings in the US every day rise from around 50 to 80 million meetings per day. Now, part of what's going on here is that about half of those meetings, over half of those meetings, are ad hoc, right? It's not the staff meeting you expected to have every Wednesday. It's meetings that just pop up on your calendar. And 90% of them have 6 or fewer participants. So when we think about meetings, we've gotten a little bit confused because I'm thinking an ad hoc conversation with 1 or 2 other people might have been not a meeting so much, but actually a conversation, right? And that difference between when we have to meet and when we can just talk to people has broken down in our increasingly remote and distributed world. Which means the stakes for facilitators look like this. So Cameron Fraser used this in one of my early IAF workshops I went to, and he said, we get people in a room for those 2 days of strategy, and beforehand, they're doing whatever they're doing. They're fully focused on the wonderful strategy for those 2 days. And then afterwards, they go back to doing whatever they're doing, right? Because those days are 100% full of trying to keep up with the work. Maria, there are lots of great data on virtual meetings, especially from Microsoft, and some of those links will be in the slides.
Maria is.
So this,
Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
go ahead. No, I think you answered it.
And then, of course, this is how most execs react, right? We've got a chronic meeting problem. It impacts every aspect of the business. It makes people quit. It makes people angry. What can be done? So I am curious. I'm going to pause for a second and find out from you in the chat. Why is this relevant to you, right? So we'll chat burst this one. If you haven't done a chat burst, this is how it works. I'll add a question, and then oh, I'm chatting to the waiting room. That's no good. Let's try that. Try that different. I'll put in a question, and then I'll give you a countdown on 3 to go ahead and put in your answer. So the first one is, my facilitation focus is. Three, two, one. Team science and stakeholder engagement, fun. Building more effective leadership teams, right? Getting everybody participating. Connections, I love that. Knowledge sharing, okay, cool. So the question, given that focus, the question you have today is, three, two, one, go. It's like, where are the answers? Oh, it's me. My fault. Ah. Why are meat bags so difficult? How do we create the conditions for better meetings? Yeah. How to sustain momentum across the teams and the implementation side. Okay, so final question. This is relevant to me because how have you helped decision makers see the problem? Three, two, one. So many corporate meetings. Mm. Yeah, organizational change is a great moment to start working on this. Mm. All right. So strong focus on outcomes and impact, right? We want to make that difference. Very cool. Well, I have unfortunate news, but since I'm going to share it, then we can we can avoid it going forward because these things, these goals, how do we have an impact? How do we help leaders care more? How do we bring this to the rest of the work? They're not new to our profession. It's not new to consultants and experts. Um, we've been working on trying to help people run better meetings for as long as there have been bad meetings. And I asked a group of experts what they advise. I said, okay, what are your top 5 tips for running effective meetings in the business world? And these are the kinds of things that came out, right? I'm sure, in the chat, if you take a look at this, you might have a few more. Connection is missing, in my in my opinion. There are a couple of other things that are missing here, but in general, I would imagine this list looks a little familiar. Um, and then I asked them a follow-up question. Now, remember, these are meeting experts. I say, what percentage of the meetings in your organization follow this advice? Use all of those things. And, when they said all of the meetings, they said maybe half, maybe not quite half. And then we said your meetings, the ones you lead, still maybe 70%. And this has been my experience working with meeting scientists, meeting facilitators, expert conveners that, yeah, they don't always use an agenda. They don't always stick to time, right? So the things that we've been teaching and advocating don't actually appear in the day-to-day successful meetings all the time. And so, well, okay, so what is it that creates that gap? If not all of your meetings are doing what they are supposed to do, why not? And they answered, of course, it is other people. It's those other people, right? Was it somebody say meat bags, right? They just don't do the things you told them to do. And so as an industry, we say, okay, well, look at all of these things the other people are doing. They're having these side conversations and they're not paying attention and they didn't showed up late and all of these things. So we had better train them. So the list of items that came from my facilitator friends and meeting expert friends, the agenda, the time, etc., shows up in the way we educate people to run better meetings. So this is a screenshot from the #1 meeting skills training on LinkedIn Learning. They have, maybe, I don't know, 50 different run better meetings things. And as you can see, 40,000 plus people have taken this particular course. to learn about, yeah, purpose and time and agendas. It turns out it took them just 1 hour to become proficient in learning these particular skills. And then thumbs up. All right, we're ready to go. But here's the challenge. You'll recognize this as a facilitator. And I would say when we're talking about business meetings, we are solving for the wrong problem because we are teaching people how to create the beautiful conditions for growing an effective meeting. How do you set the container? How do you get the environment just right? How do you let the conversation blossom? But in the business context, what we actually need to be doing is at a much larger scale. We are feeding an entire organization many times over time. And that is a world apart in terms of how we design for that success. So the first key shift that has to be made if you want to help run better, effective business meetings is you have to recognize that it is less about changing the people and more about designing the system. Because chronic meeting problems are a systems design problem. Buckminster Fuller's got this cool thing that, and a wonderful quote that captures it perfectly. You don't change it by fighting what people naturally do. You change it by building a model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that's kind of, here's some of what that looks like. So as we shift when we're doing education and when we're talking to people, what we're talking about. And this is a slide that I developed when I was talking to the executive MBA courses, where they're teaching executive leaders how to run excellent conversations with their teams. And they're all focused with things in this on this left-hand column, these conversational skills. What they focus on there is individual interactions. And you know, as a facilitator, once you start leveling up, you're looking at group interactions, right? Not just how I talk to you, but how we talk to each other. When you start talking about meetings at an organizational level, you're looking at the sequence of those group interactions over time. So meeting sequences. Conversationally, that's serendipitous. When does this come up? What came up in the chat? How do we respond? Meetings are scheduled. Those interactions happen in a sequence at a time. In systems, they're templated. So how do we run an effective review meeting every time? How do we run an effective interview every time? Conversationally, we're seeking to initiate, respond, adapt. But in meetings, you structure, right? You direct. And in systems, you design it, you monitor how it works, and then you adapt, right? So in the meeting, as a facilitator, as a designer, that all those people skills, there's a very direct hands-on kind of application. But once you scale up to that whole industrial farm level of meeting systems, the design you're working for has to be something other people can implement without you in the room, which means you need a way to monitor it. How we work with other people shifts. Are we adjusting for their personality differences, their unique needs in the moment? Or when we, as we do when we do a workshop, are we planning that there's going to be introverts and extroverts and people who need to go slow and people who need to go fast in the room? Just assume they are. And in a system, assume that some of those people will be in charge. The focus on what we want to achieve changes, right? I want to be good at creating an influence. I want to steward a group. I need to get business results. And the places we go to look for our excellent examples shift. I want to pause there. Any questions arising or thoughts, reflections on this distinction between these three levels? EOS is the entrepreneurial operating system. It's one of many business It's a way of running a smaller business, and in it, it outlines the specific format for running your weekly team meetings, your strategic planning, your quarterly check-ins, and things like that. And there are several others like that. So if anybody's been involved in Agile or Lean, they will spell out some of the meetings that you're supposed to run to make those processes work. Okay. So when you do it right, yeah, Lencioni does too, absolutely. So what happens, right? Once you've looked at it as a system and you design the system, and start paying attention to not how do I make people run a better meeting, but how do I make a better meeting that any of the people can run? What happens? Well, a couple of examples. It can take many forms. So this is a very serious looking bunch of folks. This is the board for the ASTM International. They're an international standard setting body that comes together and they decide, how fundamental standards will govern commerce. And in that world, that's a very committee-based, multi-stakeholder kind of world. So on average, it takes 2 or more years for a standard to go from a proposal to being something that's built into international law. ASTM decided that that was too long and they wanted to be more competitive in the market. So they focused very specifically on how they ran their decision making and standards review meetings. And by focusing explicitly on running those meetings really, really well, they got the time from start to finish down to 6 months, which is an enormous shift. This is Zingerman's. They are a collection of food-based businesses based in Ann Arbor. They have a very special way that they run their weekly meetings in all of their businesses where they open the books for everybody. So everybody in the company, from the dishwasher to the manager, can see exactly what their revenue is, exactly what all of their scores are. And then they all participate very openly in sharing celebrations, in acknowledgments, and in driving that performance. Because they operate the way they do, that organization keeps people forever. So if you've ever worked in food-based businesses, you know turnover is incredibly high. You don't start as a dishwasher and then stay for 20 years. But they have people who do. And they are currently an $80 million business, which is not too shabby for a deli. This is Shishir Maroda and Reid Hoffman. Shishir used to be the product manager at YouTube. And one thing that we don't remember necessarily about YouTube is that when Google first acquired YouTube, it was nobody was clear what it was for, and it was losing all kinds of money. And so their teams were trying to figure out what to work on, and they were fighting. And you had the ad team and the content team, and they were all just sort of at crosshairs. Shishir, as the gentleman in charge of that particular project, said, we have to fix how we work together. And what he did is he designed a series of 4 meetings that made it very, very clear when they were talking about work in progress, how they made a decision, and then how they surfaced and solved problems together. YouTube has since, of course, become incredibly successful, and Shishir's gone on to found Coda, which just bought Grammarly and a bunch of other companies. It's becoming the next giant tech success story. And these are the teams at Cisco. Teams at Cisco had a heck of a time with their performance management system. They would do those annual reviews every year. Everybody hated them. They took a lot of time, and people were quitting anyway. Ashley Goodall came in and he said, you know what, let's do this differently. And he implemented a system that consisted of a single meeting every week between a manager and their direct reports, where the manager says, what are your priorities this week? And how can I help you? And by ensuring that well-designed, very simple meeting practice was completely adopted across the company, they ditched all of the expensive performance management and all of those reviews and 360s and all of those things, and dramatically changed engagement and retention at the company over the course of 3 years. So here's some examples of what happens when a system makes it easy and natural for people to do good things together. So my first promise delivery for you is this. If you want to expand your impact, um, you have to help leaders solve a better problem. Look at that system. Which raises the next question and gets to the meat of what we promised. It's so much work. Where do you even start, right? There's so many meetings. So that's where the meeting types come in. And that was the problem my company was originally founded to solve in 2010. We started as a software company, and our goal was to be the GPS of meetings for leaders, right? Like, so they'd walk in and it would just tell them how to be effective. Um, and as we were working on that, we're like, okay, be effective doing what? So I'd be love to hear from somebody. What's a process that you oversee it with one of your clients? Like, new hire or onboard or strategic planning. Who's got one? Decision making, yeah, but towards what goal? For what, in what part of the business? Athena, quarterly meetings with grantees. Okay, so Athena, are you willing to come off mute?
Sure.
Excellent. So, Athena, you've got the quarterly meeting. What are the other meetings that lead up to it and that follow it?
There is a uh, maybe two meetings that we call onboarding.
Mhm.
So that's sort of like the tail end of contracting, and then a follow-up to make sure that they understand what they signed, compliance, etc. And then we go into the quarterly meeting. And then after the quarterly meeting, um, there probably isn't another meeting unless there's an issue that arises. But otherwise, the next quarterly meeting is after that.
So, what is the function of the quarterly meeting if it isn't followed by one? What does that do for people?
Well, the quarterly meeting helps us understand where they are as far as their milestones and if they're meeting them. And for the grantee in particular, it helps them understand if they're on track to receive their next series of payments.
Okay. So then potentially the grantee themselves, based on what they hear in that quarterly meeting, is going to have their own internal meeting to figure out what to do with it. Excellent. Okay. Great example. Um, One more, the OKR setting. Omar, are you willing to talk about that?
Sure.
So what leads up to OKR setting and what are the meetings involved in that process?
So usually you're supposed to have um, meetings bi-weekly to talk about the OKRs that were set from last quarter, which never usually happen. They're usually reviewed right before you're supposed to set your OKRs again for the next quarter. Um, and usually before you set your OKRs for the quarter that's coming, you have several planning meetings with the teams, and usually a VP or a director to see what levers were moved, if any, usually not. And it's usually a dreaded 2 week process, like about quarterly and yearly as well before the year is over as well. It's also hair pulling season.
Right. Right. And that's a broken system, right?
Yes.
That's a broken system. Um, and it's basically, I would say, half implemented. So you've got the OKR meetings, great, but how do the OKRs live between the OKR meetings so that there isn't this rush to like try and true them up on a regular basis? Um, yeah, so that's where oh, Mara, yeah.
No, sorry, I was just trying to do a thumbs up. Totally agree.
Oh, yay!
Yeah.
Okay, so so that was the problem we were trying to solve too. We would see these things and they'd be disjointed, and what we found as we were doing software was that the leaders who had come to use the software didn't actually know how to assemble a great meeting. You know, we couldn't just say, "Hey, have an intro and do your work, and then close it out, and that'd be great." You fill in your specifics. It didn't work, so we had to create templates, and I started working with business people and facilitators and scientists and creating templates. And we started with one, and then people are saying, yeah, but I don't want to run an agile project daily stand up. I need a different meeting. So we made some more templates, and we did a board meeting and some feedback and a huddle, and boy, that wasn't enough. So then we made some more templates, and over time we're like, dang nation, when will we be done? Because there are so many different kinds of meetings. And that's where this taxonomy comes from. So we looked across businesses in all industries that we could find, nonprofit, public sector, different industries, and we identified 16 different flavors of meetings that show up in pretty much every organization. At the top, we have what we call the cadence meetings. These are the meetings that existing teams or groups use to review work that is in progress to make sure that it's on track and to do course correction. We represent these with the circle because they're about keeping the work going. And these, I will tell you quite honestly, these are where the bulk of the meetings are, and these are the hardest to design because these are the ones where you are connecting, you're building those bonds as teams. So all of those team rituals belong here. They're also the ones where you need to be productive and keep the work moving. And they're the ones that are most likely to default to kind of what I'm doing right now, and with the talking heads sharing at each other. So, which is the least effective use of meeting time if you're not in a learning environment. So if you go and look at our template library, and we have guidebooks for many of those templates, you'll find they're heavy on meetings in this category because these are difficult. The next set is the catalyst meetings. So these are meetings that change the game, right? We bring the right group of people together to come up with something that will shift what we're doing in a significant way. And this is really the landscape of facilitation, right? You see workshops are in here. And it's about getting the people and the process correct. So if you look at problem-solving meetings or decision-making meetings, oh, it's because I didn't put the ES on the end. Thank you. They have, a sequence of steps you use to help people think together in the same way at the same time. So in some ways they're easier, except that you need a little bit of facilitation grace to deal with the edges around it. And then finally, the last set we have are the context. So the meetings we use to learn about what's going on and to influence groups and connections. These are really about art, right? So negotiators have a special skill set. Mediators have a special skill set. Trainers have a special skill set. So each one of these has an entire practice body behind it. But they are also things that you can absolutely use methods to help make better. So in sense making, we know lots as facilitators, lots of great ways to help groups uncover and understand and make sense of a situation in front of them. When I present this, I'm often told 16 meeting types. Are you mad? You only need 3. What are you thinking? That's way too many. Well, I agree. It is way too many for most individuals in their roles, which is why it's useful to understand when they come into play. So if your role is about building engagement and cohesion, you're going to be running and focusing on these meetings. If your role is about productivity and quality, you're going to be looking at these meetings. So if you run lean or agile or overall governance, these will look familiar. Innovation focuses on all of these sort of game-changing meetings and some about moving it forward. And then finally, when you want to sell and connect, you're going to be down here in these sections of influence and then making sure that you're selling better all the time. And then here's how they become building blocks and what we do with them. So once you understand these distinct types of meetings and that each one of them helps us achieve a new function, you can design them over time to help businesses and teams know that every conversation has a home. So this is a well-designed leadership team meeting flow model where they have specific, predictable, planned times to be working on the business. So their strategy workshops, their council meetings, and distinct awareness of how they will work in the business. So if they have up here setting their goals in the strategy workshop, they know that those goals will be then reviewed every week. They know in this weekly meeting, if something comes up that says that their goals or their plan is off board, they have time dedicated every 90 days or so, or at least once a month, to make a big decision, right? Because making a big decision on the fly isn't how effective decision making works. You want to look at the options. You want it to do some real consensus building. So they want to go ahead and bake that into their plan. And by doing this, all of these things pre-done on their calendars, they have predictability about when they'll plan, when they'll solve problems, when they'll check in, when they'll learn what's going on, when they'll sync up across their team boundaries. And their time is predictable. What will happen isn't predictable, but they have a reliable use of their time and they can be more careful with their calendars. And the problem changes. We're solving a better problem here because if this isn't working, if these are too frequent or too boring or waste of their time, you can fix the weekly team meeting. You don't have to send all of the leaders off to learn about agendas. You fix the weekly team meeting, and that is a much better problem to solve. Quick case study on how this plays out, and then we're going to have you have a chance to play with it. So I worked with an engineering group. They were 500 plus engineers working in a software company, and they were drowning, right? Their calendars were completely full, fighting between the teams. And because they weren't entirely clear on how to run, everybody was showing up to every meeting just in case their project got talked about, right? So you get the great big bloated meetings. And we worked through looking at the system with their 30 top managers. It shouldn't. I'll fix that. That's the wrong link. Let me fix that link. Give me a second. So here's what we did. The first system change we made is that every meeting that was on their calendar had to have a purpose and outcomes. A really simple change, right? What exactly is it for and what needs to come out at the end? Which immediately revealed that the product owners and the managers couldn't always articulate those things, right? They'd go to put a meeting on the calendar and they'd be like, wait a second, I'm not sure quite what this is. And they would then stop and not put the meeting on the calendar and instead, have a conversation. But as they tried to work through that, they realized there were hidden dependencies. There were things they couldn't see between each other. So they changed their reports. They documented their decisions. And yet, as they were doing that, these were the leaders. They'd been through the training. They knew to do all of that. They were burning out, right? They were like, okay, I'm doing the thing. I've designed my meetings. I'm taking the notes. But it was so much work. So, as a final change, they said, okay, we've made the meeting clear enough now. We're going to change it so that every week somebody new on my team runs the meeting. And as leaders, my role is to say, hey, we've got this much time. We need to achieve these goals. You run it however you want to run it. And so they did. And then all of a sudden, what you get is people come in and, today I run it this way, but next week Monique comes in and she plays 3 funny videos and we do a little dance to sort of show how we're going to go through the thing. And then next week Lisa comes in and it's all business. And then the week after that, Christine comes in and it's radically different. So they ended up creating a leadership lab in their meetings. and learning and improving quickly while getting more work done. So that becomes not just better meetings and a better use of their time, that becomes culture, right? That becomes productive and excellent. So let's have you apply this to your work. Omar.
Yeah, I was gonna put in the chat a little while ago. You mentioned some examples of Cisco and the standard creation kind of group, and I can't remember the other two teams. Um, but my question was around, oh right, and the YouTube PM. The question was around the difference between top-down new meeting structure directive, right? Like this is how we're going to do things now. And obviously there's success stories there. And also what you just mentioned, which was a little bit more crowdsourced new meeting structure. And the difference between that, because you can have somebody like yourself who can kind of come in more with a consultant hat, do the analysis, draw up the report, and say, okay, this is what you should try out. And then you have a facilitator who's more of the person who's kind of crowdsourcing this information so that there's buy-in amongst the team on what's going to work, and at least they can actually give it a shot.
Yeah, so there's always a blend, right? It's always top down plus bottom up if it's going to be successful. And in the example that I was just talking about with the engineering team, they began by the leaders saying, okay, let's get this all sorted and worked out. And I didn't tell them how to do that. I gave them the infrastructure and the toolkit for them to do that for themselves, and then answered questions as they did so. But what happened then is that you had enough structure from leadership that within those boundaries, um, individuals could then iterate. They could play. And that was the leadership lab. Somebody asked about that too. What is the leadership lab? The leadership lab is, hey, you know what? All of you folks who are like, hey, this meeting's a problem and I don't like it and we should do this. Guess what? You're in charge next week. Right? So what happens with our managers in most of our organizations right now is that at some point they've been a great individual contributor and then they become a manager and now they're in charge of meetings. And they aren't trained how to run effective meetings, and they only know what they saw done before them. And so they default to what's safe. We're going to talk about the work and we're going to get out of here and then we're done, right? I've been efficient, right? So when they are, as a team member, getting an opportunity to run those, that gives them a chance to play with, hey, your expectation is we'll connect. How do you want to connect? And that was the lab part of it. That is the correct link. I want you to have a chance to play with this. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to break into groups, but before we do, I want you to take a couple minutes and just think. In your business, in your role within your organization, if you work within an organization, what are the conversations you need to happen for you to succeed? Pick one function or process and just, on a piece of paper or in your head, start thinking through what those meetings are. And then think about the one that's the make or break. Because there's usually one. So I'll give you a quick example. This is my make or break process as an independent consultant and outside expert. It's the sales process, right? Once I get the sale, then we can play. But getting the sale is always hard. And the make or break meeting for me is right there. If I'm not clear about who's in the room, if I explain what I do wrong, if I talk too much, all of those things, the sale fails. So I need to get really, really good at that meeting. I'm going to give you just a minute to think through this. You're not going to get to go that deep, and then we'll break you into groups so that you can compare notes about what you see in your process with others. So I'm going to put the instructions in the chat about what you'll be doing and stop the screen sharing for just a minute.
Give them 15 seconds. So they should be back.
Who was cut off mid-sentence? Oh no. Always, right? Always. They're either too short or too long. It's a very Goldilocks problem, these breakout rooms. I'm curious, who heard something from a colleague that you think the rest of the group really needs to hear? Is there an insight or a question that would add value for all of us? Diane.
Hi, everybody. I was speaking with Ian, and I think the insight that I took away from our conversation, because I was going, wow, I would if I had done this, it would have been so fantastic. The whole idea of turning it over to the team, I loved it. But I think what we came away from the conversation was I was able to be I was in the position to do that, and if I'd thought of doing it, it would have been transformative, I think. But it was my meeting. I was running a big program. It was my meeting. And Ian's perspective is like, so what we came away from it is depends on where you sit in the hierarchy a little bit. And his situation was where I'm speaking for Ian a little bit, but was it's not his meeting. And so how much degree of control do you have? And how open are the people that are used to it being the way that it is to think about it differently and perhaps pass the pen over? Like if my boss had come in and said, now you've got to let the team run the meeting, it would have been a little bit different. Or one of my team members had said, you're just being a tyrant and you need to be different and better. Would it have worked? Would they have felt safe in being able to put that forward? Or is there an environment that exists outside of the meeting that makes it difficult?
Right. And this is one of the reasons why those, I love you, I love that you brought that up, why those taking individuals and teaching them about agendas is like taking individuals and teaching them how to shoot basketball free throws and then sending them out to play hockey, right? You can have the skills if your environment is not welcoming of you demonstrating those skills, because that's just not the way we work. It's a very, very difficult change to make. So this gets into change management and influence and all of those things. But what we have found to be most successful in these environments is to help the team do it together, first of all, so that leaders are typically doing similar expectations from the high level, setting boundaries at a high level, and then giving the teams and the functional units tools to design together their flows. And telling lots and lots of stories about how cool companies that they admire do it and like it, right? So it's that social, let's not be the one lame company or the one lame nonprofit that wastes all of our time in PowerPoint theater. Let's be one of the cool kids that competes, that's fun, that welcomes. Any other reflections? Okay. I'm going to give you the lightning stretch break while I pop some better links into the chat. Keynote wants to know if I'm enjoying it. This is my favorite slide. I picked this up from some chiropractors about things you can do at your desk that keep you from locking up and being uncomfortable and stiff and in pain. So 10, we're not going to take all 10 seconds for each one, but please feel free to move a little bit. And in the chat, these are the two links I meant to give you before. One is a link about templates and the other is about meeting types. And let me make sure that we deliver on this final promise. Manal and I were talking earlier about, different ways to run conversations like this. So I had been asked by a bunch of people to stop engaging them so much and just give them all of the information they can use. So today, that's what we're doing, but please feel free to interrupt me if you have other questions as we finish up.
Buried in the chat. So, Sharon, I don't know if you want to speak on what you typed in the chat.
I was just reflecting on what Diane was expressing, that that environment around you and those feedback loops, whether you get positive feedback, which, from your boss or whatever, that, but this is a waste of time. And, that might sort of derail your efforts to establish and sustain a new system versus a negative feedback that, in systems is actually a good thing, where you're sort of getting people are more engaged, and you're hearing, they're willing to step up and take leadership of those meetings, for example. But those feedback loops are really going to determine whether or not those system changes that you're trying to make actually stick and are sustainable over time. And that's an ongoing process, obviously. And someone's got to be looking at that and managing it in some way.
I'm glad we started talking about system changes, because that helps us bring us to our last promise fulfillment, which is about designing better takeaways. So systems change is incremental often. I mean, it can be disruptive in large scale, but for this kind of work, what I found is that it cascades. And one of my favorite examples I think is something to keep in mind when you are working with a client on something like values, right? How do you articulate your values, or adopting a new behavior, or trying to aspire to, say, develop something like psychological safety, or, constructive conflict or whatnot. So we can go off and we can do the workshop, but how do you make sure that work then becomes that behavior becomes part of how they live every day? And I want to tell you the story about the city of Valdez. And again, this is a cascade of things that happened, right? So they engaged us to help them because they had a weekly leadership team meeting that always ran late and never completed all of their action items, and their projects were running behind, and it was a drudgery to work in Alaska on boats, and the seasonal workers kept quitting, and everybody was frustrated. So we began with the small thing. We restructured that leadership team meeting. And then I asked them to do what I just asked you to do. I said, okay, you all work on different departments. What are all the meetings you need to run to get your work done? And so they made these charts and they laid them all out, and we looked at it and we said, well, that's way too many meetings. If you all ran all the meetings you need to get your work done, you wouldn't do anything else. It's too many. Which made us look at it and say, oh, well, okay, what can we combine? What can we simplify? And we did. We simplified a bunch of things. Changed the structure again, which gave them some space. And then with that space, they said, well, gosh, we're doing better, but they don't feel awesome. And I said, well, what do you want them to feel like? And I said, well, we want an environment where we're demonstrating positive stewardship. They said, okay, what does that mean in practice? So in practice, what it ended up meaning for them is, well, we can't exactly have a positive, welcoming environment if our meetings start at 8 because people just showed up and they're still wet from the snow. So nothing can start before 8:30. And if it starts at 8:30 and I'm running, and I can show up early and I can make coffee and make sure that's ready for everybody and the table set. And, if people show up a little bit early, I want them to have fun. I want them to be on time. So how about while they're showing up, we'll throw up on the screen some YouTube videos of funny boating accidents. Because apparently if you manage a port and harbor, boating accidents are hilarious. And oh, by the way, why don't we extend this hosting, this welcoming to everybody? So when we work with our seasonal dock workers, when they show up, let's hand them a cup of coffee and shake their hands. And when we do the safety check, let's talk about how that helps them go home to their families. And through those changes, they ended up radically changing their culture. All of their seasonal workers returned year over year. They had usually had about 30% return year over year. Their project completion went down. They had fewer meetings. Their legal fees went down because when the lawyer showed up, they shaked his hand, gave him a cup of coffee, said, here's what we're done with. This is all we need from you. Thank you very much. They ran an efficient meeting. And they sold more business to the harbor, which was the first time that had happened in years. So embedding values literally on the wall in their case. They printed it all up. But what does that look like for your clients, right? When you do that work, how does it show up every day? So that's one way to think about how to embed and extend the impact. The other story I want to tell is about Beatrice Biggs. Who here knows Bea? She's a an IAF facilitator mentor for many years, and she was called in to work with a group in Mexico. It was a marketing agency, and their job was to help the political campaigns win elections. But they had a problem because they would set these campaign projects together, but they weren't meeting their deadlines. The clients were complaining, so they weren't getting repeat business. And the teams, the graphic designers and everything, were quitting. And the leaders decided it was too much time wasted in unproductive meetings. So they called Bea, and their calendars kind of reflected that. I don't know if you've seen calendars like this, but ay. So they called her and they said, hey, come do a workshop because we need agendas and some facilitation skills and some time management skills, please. Just teach our people better skills. She decided to approach it a little bit differently because she and I had been working together for a while. And she said, okay, well, tell me what is on those meetings. What kinds of meetings are we trying to develop agendas for? And she found a whole bunch of these sync ups. So what the heck? What are those, right? So, sync is just another way of saying meeting. It's one of many synonyms. So if you find these on your calendar, that tells you that you're going to occupy people's time, not what you're going to do with it. It doesn't mean anything. So she had all of these meetings that didn't mean anything that they were supposed to design. And usually that's not because people don't know that they should have an agenda. Ad hoc meetings are typically a sign of one of three things. Something's happened that they weren't expecting, so therefore they need to meet. Something's happened between them that they need to get into a room to resolve. Or something's happened and they're blocked. And sometimes a combination of all three. So if you see a lot of ad hoc meetings, sync ups, meetups, touch base, et cetera, that means there's something broken in the flow of the work. Somehow. So, what was that? Oh, wrong direction. Oh, no, here it is. So she asked them, she laid out the whole process and said, okay, what is going on? Where are things broken? And what she found is a couple of things. The first thing they mentioned was that in the client meetings, so they have a sales call and a kickoff workshop, and then they go off and do a bunch of work and they do a status update. They get to this update with the client, and the client would say, oh, by the way, there's all of this stuff. We can't use that because there's these other things we never mentioned before. Oh, okay. So there's a whole bunch of rework they have to do there. So that was one of the problems. Things that had happened. So when she looked at that workshop they were doing, the kickoff workshop, every single design lead ran it differently. So the things that they were finding as the stuff they hadn't learned before were different for every client. The other problem she ran into was this one. So internally, they would do a bunch of work, and then every month they had a decision making, a client readiness review where the partners of the firm would look at all the designs and say, this is good enough to go in front of the client. And she said, well, okay, what percentage of your designs get approved on the first time they go into that review? And the team said, oh, that never happens. They never are approved the first time. And she said, well, how does that impact your schedules? And they said, well, definitely it makes us have to go back and sync up and redo the design and redo our plans. And that's why our projects are always late. So what she did for them is she helped them with that workshop design, but she also helped them add extra meetings that solved these problems. So right up there at the very beginning, after they've sold the deal, they did a sense making, a discovery call where they asked the client about all of the things that could potentially come up and interrupt their project. And they ran it in a standardized way. And because these are sensitive political campaigns, they very clearly expressed confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements, which were missing, right? That's not a meetings problem. That's a policy problem. But it was showing up in creating all kinds of meetings. So they fixed that. they designed the workshop so that in the workshop they were very, very clear. Here's our plan, here's our structure, here's what we'll do. And if this goes wrong, here's how we will change it and update our plan if something happens. And they added that problem solving scope change meeting as a way to respond to changes, as opposed to just getting in a room and trying to figure it out. And then finally, they found that partners were seeing these designs for the first time, and every time they rejected them. So they made sure the partners saw them before they got into the meeting. And they added a way for partners to see work that was in process asynchronously before they came into the design reviews. And then the percentage of designs that were approved in design review the first time went up dramatically. So sometimes, even though it feels like the wrong thing to do, the way to improve the way work flows is to actually add a few targeted better design meetings. And this is how BIA helped them with their agendas to run and time management to run better meetings and solve this flow. So the thing for you to consider is how you can help your clients use meetings to better achieve their goals. Any questions or thoughts? Mara?
Hi, this is great. One of the things that in my experience, when you have those, you have to add the meetings or replace an existing non-functional meeting with a standard one that's always there to replace those ad hocs. The other thing I think that's important is everybody comes to that, but it doesn't, if your decision gets made in it's a 90-minute meeting, but you're able to come to consensus in 30 minutes, then stop. So
Yeah.
people think, oh, I've got these extra meetings in my calendar, but if you really focus the purpose properly and it's at the correct sequence of like how often and so forth, you'll often end up having more efficient meetings, and therefore then the time in the meeting actually gets reduced. And you free up, oh, now I'm supposed to be in a meeting, but I actually got an hour back in my day.
Isn't that wonderful?
Makes
I
sense,
love
yeah.
that. I love that you brought that up. It reminds me of Anderson Construction here in Portland, Oregon. Giant construction firm, and when you're a construction firm, you put up skyscrapers and grocery stores, and that's your firm working with a whole bunch of other firms and the client. And they had this problem where the communication would break down between all of those chains, and they would get late and they'd be delayed and there'd be errors and they'd have to do rework. So they adopted a process where they worked with a facilitator to design these communication contracts with all of those players. And to begin with, when they first started doing it, it was 2 days, right? They rent a hotel ballroom, they'd be 2 days with all of the players doing all of this work. 5 years later, they had it down to 30 minutes and lunch. Because it was clear, it was specific. They knew exactly what they needed to achieve. And because they were working not on, people skills, but on fixing a meeting, they got really good at it. So this has been our journey.
So Elise, just
Manal,
a couple comments in the chat. So
Yeah,
from
yeah,
Ryan,
yeah.
I'm now wondering what are the kinds of assumptions people make about the participants in the meeting, and then another comment from Sabrine.
Ryan, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, and this is based on my overall corporate experience, not just now as a facilitator, but it's astounding how people assume that things will get done just because you sat in a meeting. That is even, and in the current scenario of mine where I do work as a trainer and facilitator, the assumption is that if people are sitting in the room, then training has happened and therefore learning has happened and everything will change. It will be all bright blue skies tomorrow, and it's done. We are done. So these are some of the assumptions I deal with and have experienced. I was wondering what else could be there, these kind of meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of the goal here, right? So on our journey, it's a systems problem. And the training doesn't fix individuals, doesn't fix systems. Changing systems fixes systems. And those systems rely on, like we were talking about with those Mara's example, if it's repeatable, then you can get better at it, then other people can run it. It's not just you as the facilitator. Sabrina asked, how do you encourage people to share laser focus points in the meeting? One of the things I found there is that you accept the expectation that's what you want to do, and the team themselves can tell you some great ways to make that happen. I've had teams that have chosen, they do all of their updates in writing and in silence together during the meeting and then only ask questions. I have teams that say, okay, we put our headlines on it. We have other teams that say, no, we're going to take the time because we like to be together and think deeply. So that if that's the goal, setting those conditions helps make that repeatable and better over time. It's really about making it so that when people walk into a system, into a room, they have clear expectations about how to behave, and their assumptions are in line with what we want to have happen in our organization and with each other. These 16 types are just building blocks. We find that starting from, I've got to design a meeting is too hard. So understanding, this helps narrow down the scope of where we start. And as building blocks, every decision-making meeting, it looks more like other decision-making meetings than it does like an interview or, a problem-solving call. So starting with some of those foundations helps. They're not exhaustive, but it's a good start. And the other great thing about systems is that you can start small and it ripples. Right. Valdez, which was a gorgeous case study. I was so excited about what they figured out to do for themselves. Started with a better leadership team agenda. It started simple. Let's write down our action items at the end of the meeting. And then it was able to cascade because we were talking about things in different ways and trying to design better systems. That's what I have for you today. I'd be curious, final questions and takeaways, but I have in the chat also some resources to share if you found this useful. Oh no, all of the line breaks came through. Why did they do that? I'm gonna apologize right now for all my line breaks. Here, I'm gonna have to do this differently. Oh, I did it wrong. God love it. Goodness me. So there are other people who focus on meetings as systems beyond myself. Our resources are in there, but I encourage you to follow Carrie Goucher. So Dr. Goucher does a fabulous job of putting out simple ways to improve communications and internal team work. Rebecca Hines has a new book coming out. And Lauren Green does a This Meeting Sucks podcast, which has always got some fun tips in it. So those are all some other ways to take it deeper. For you, Carrie's wonderful, right? What are you taking away from this? Sure, Omar. Madeline, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so this is a team that I'm not a part of anymore, but very, feeling trauma informed. We meet the individual where they're at. How can we possibly be supportive of that when we have a template for a team meeting? Hmm.
You might use different words.
Okay.
Template
Mhm.
sounds business, right? It sounds,
Absolutely.
but rituals,
Oh.
convenings, how do we gather?
Hmm. Mhm.
This is what it means to be in community and to hold each other for our group.
Mhm. Mhm.
And as long as the assumption is made clear and the way that that assumption is lived is clear, that's a template essentially. But we don't
Yeah.
have to call it that.
I love that. Thank you, Elise.
Hmm. Yeah. Yay. Manal, I think we've closed it out. I'm happy to take any questions and linger, but we've hit our last 2 minutes. Thank you for
Awesome.
letting me
Thank you
just
so
info
much.
dump on all of you.
The pleasure is ours, Elise. So before we wrap up, just a few things from me. As I mentioned, I'll be sending the recording, the resources that all of the links that Elise has shared. And the links that you all have shared. I'll be sending that in a follow-up email. So I just want to thank you all for showing up. I know this is super cliche, but this only happens because of you. Now, for those of us that have joined our Learn and Connect, we have a final ritual, and we call it a chat waterfall, but I learned that Elise calls it a blast, so we'll go with that. So we'll do one final blast. Elise has the incredible gift. She takes something that we all know and are familiar with, or at least think we're familiar with, meetings, and makes us see them as living systems. And her insights remind us that facilitation doesn't just happen in the workshop, it lives in everything that happens before and after. And so this is usually the part where I thank Elise, but I want us to all do it collectively together. And so we'll take 15 seconds to think about what you want to say to Elise, maybe a nugget of wisdom you're taking away, a shift in how you approach your own meetings, or simply a heartfelt thank you. And then in 10 seconds, we will press enter and just shower her with confetti of love. So when I give the cue, we'll all send together and create a beautiful chat blast of appreciation. So just take a moment to type in the chat. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elise. From all of us to you, you've given us a lot to think about and laugh about as well, and most importantly, to redesign. Thanks,
Systems chain
everyone.
for the win. All right.
See you soon. Take care.